Tonight we have a guest who's been here many, many times, but there's always, regardless of how many times she's been here, there's always a sense of anticipation that she'll bring a good word from Zion. So join with me as we welcome Sondra Baras.
Hi, everybody. All right, I'm going to put this on. Is that okay? And I actually wore a pocket today. How many women here have pockets? You love your pockets? I almost never have a pocket. Anyway, okay. So hi, everybody. So I think like we know each other. Is there anybody here who I've never met? Nobody. Yeah, you? I've never met you. I've never met you. Welcome. Kind of funny that I should say welcome. You're the ones who are here. I can do that? Oh, good, good. I always say this is, and this is true, this is the first church I ever had anything to do with, ever, you know. Now I run Christian Friends of Israeli Communities, but before that was the case, I met people from fellowship. So I have a very warm part of my heart for fellowship. And of course for John Klein, who's sitting back there, who's the person who first introduced me to fellowship. What can I say? All right, anyway, it's great to be back here, and I saw some of you in Kidumim a couple months ago. You're always working so hard, and it's great. How many of you are going next year? You don't know that yet. Okay, good. Well, hope to see you soon again. All right, so I want to do a few things tonight, but first, I want to show a very short clip. I'm very excited about this clip because this is something we produced. It took us time to put this together and come up with the idea, etc. And we produced it and launched it today. It's a short clip on YouTube. And those of it, did anybody get this in your email today? Or Facebook or whatever? Okay, so you got both. So I'm going to show it to you now. I hope you'll really like it. And of course, what you need to do is you need to go home and share it with everybody you know. Okay? Do you know how to do that? I don't. Actually, I do a little bit. I'm learning, but whatever. Okay, anyway, why don't we see this clip first? So it's very exciting, and this was a film we did, and we wanted to go all over the world because we want to thank you, Christian friends, who are standing with Israel. Amen is right. Absolutely. And we produced it, but we just went all over Judea and Samaria and got all kinds of people to participate. And the whole idea is this really is representative. It's coming from the people of Israel in general, but specifically in Judea and Samaria. And, you know, I just want to remind you that exactly 1 year ago, tomorrow, on May 14th, today's May 13th, right, May 14th, last year, the United States opened up the embassy in Jerusalem. And you know what? I have been doing this work now for many, many years. Those of you who know me for a long time, Pat probably is one of the first people I met, I think, in this church. Anyway, we have been working for a long time, reaching out to Christians and to connect them with what's happening in Judea and Samaria. Now, why did we do this? I mean, there's people who say, well, why Christians? Why Judea and Samaria? And really, the answer is very simple. First of all, Judea and Samaria is my passion, and I believe it is the heart of the conflict. Because if you'll notice today, anybody that attacks Israel today, they're focusing on the settlements. If you look at the BDS movement, boycott, divestment, and sanctions, what are they talking about? They're talking about boycotting things that are grown or produced in Judea and Samaria. And so there are people who will say, oh, that doesn't make them anti-Israel. They're just, you know, on the left or liberal side of the map. And for some people, that's absolutely true. Except that the very fight against Judea and Samaria, what those people don't understand is that the fight against Judea and Samaria is hitting the nerve of the whole issue. Because once you say that Judea and Samaria is not part of Israel, it is a very short leap to say Jews have no right to the land of Israel. Why is that? It's very easy. It's very logical, okay? Israel is a land, let's look at the Palestinian narrative for a moment. Israel is a land in the middle of the Middle East, right? It is in the middle of Muslim territory, okay? It was an integral part of the Ottoman Empire and all the various Muslim empires that preceded it, okay? What are the Palestinians saying? What are all the Arabs saying? They're saying, these Jews, they belong in Europe. They have nothing to do with the land of Israel. The land of Israel, they don't call it the land of Israel, they call it Palestine. They say Palestine is ours. It's Palestinian, it's Arab, whatever. Who are these Jews that came here? They're a bunch of upstarts. They think because, and this I'm saying it particularly, 2 weeks ago we commemorated 6 million who were murdered by the Nazis in the Holocaust. Last week we had Israel Independence Day. And of course, these two events come together in a very significant way. But what the Arabs have said, those who believe that the Holocaust actually happened, of course, there's a whole group of Arabs who say that it never happened. But those who believe it happened, they're going to say, just because Germans murdered Jews, we, the Palestinians, have to give up our land? What is the essence of what they are saying? The Jews are foreigners in the land of Israel. The Jews have no place in the land of Israel. And basically what they're arguing is that the international community felt sorry for the Jews who had suffered at the hands of the Europeans and looked at Israel and say, oh, that's a pretty empty land. Let's just, you know, no oil, right? It's not really valuable to anybody, right? We'll give that to the Jews and get them off of our conscience, okay? If that's the story, then the Palestinians are 100% right. They weren't the Nazi perpetrators, although, of course, there were some that were allies of them. But, you know, you can understand their point of view. They say, why do we have to give up our land just because the Europeans were killing the Jews? What does that have to do with us? The answer, of course, is that we are not foreigners in the land of Israel. We are the original natives. Okay, so from where did that begin? So if you're going to start the story from 1898 in the first Zionist Congress, I mean, at that point, there were almost no Jews. There were a few Jews in Israel. There were always a few Jews in Israel. But you're going to have a hard time proving that Israel belongs to the Jews if you're going back to the end of the 19th century. If you don't go back to the beginning, if you don't go back to the Bible, if you don't go back to that first moment in time where God selected Abraham and said, I'm giving this land to your children, and of course following that story through to when the children of Israel actually come in and inherit the land under Joshua, and the kingdoms that are established, and of course the period of Joshua and the judges, and then we have Saul and David and Solomon, and then unfortunately the divided kingdom. But we have centuries of Jewish independence, or they call themselves Israelites then, you know, Israelite independence in the land of Israel, that is then separated for 70 years, interrupted for 70 years by the Babylonians, and then again they come back for centuries more of Jewish independence in the land of Israel. If you don't go back to that, then the Palestinians are right. Well, if you go back to that, where is it that the Jews were living? Where was the center of Jewish living throughout the biblical period? Judea and Samaria. Amen. The undivided capital of Israel, Jerusalem, was first established by King David 3,000 years ago. So when 1 year ago, the President of the United States opened, well, through his representatives. He wasn't there himself. But when the United States Embassy opened its doors for the first time in Jerusalem, exactly 1 year ago, that was an amazing accomplishment. And you know, I remember back many years ago, already Congress passed a law that required the opening of the embassy in Jerusalem. And there wasn't a single president or presidential candidate running for president since that time that didn't pledge to actually move the embassy to Jerusalem. It didn't matter if the candidate was Democrat or Republican, they all pledged the same thing, and they all reneged on their pledge. Every single one. So that most Jews, certainly in Israel, didn't even believe it was going to happen. And then President Trump did it, okay? Now, I'll tell you what made an enormous difference in Israel. The ceremony itself. Did anybody of you watch it on television? So you had the usual, the politicians and this and that. You know, the the American ambassador to Israel, who is an Orthodox Jew from New York, a little bit insane, you know, and different people spoke, and then there were two pastors who spoke. One was John Hagee, who you may have heard of, I know personally. The other one, I can't remember his name because I'd never met him before. But he's a pastor. I think he's probably close to President Trump in some way. But I don't know, put him aside for a moment. But the one that really made the most amazing impression, of course, was John Hagee. John Hagee is a long-time supporter of Israel. And and I know there are people in the Christian world who like him and people who don't like him, but it doesn't matter. I would assume that everybody in this room today would agree wholeheartedly with everything he said at that ceremony. He got up there and he spoke as a pastor, as a Christian, talking about how Israel, just exactly what we were just saying, how Israel, the land of Israel belongs to the Jewish people back to when God promised it to Abraham, and he traced Jewish history, and he talked about how American policy today is in line with what? With the biblical principles and with what people believe. And I have to tell you that this was probably the most prominent display of the importance of Christian support for Israel that anyone in Israel has ever seen. Okay? Now, I've been doing this. I've been going to churches and traveling around, not just America, but many other countries around the world now for 21 years, something like that. And of course, my work and the work of others like me has reached the Israeli press, and certainly in Judea and Samaria, it's become much more of a topic that people are aware of and even discuss. Because we are so controversial that I would safely say the only group out there that supports us in any significant numbers are Christians. But because Judea and Samaria continues to be controversial, it continues to be a problem. You turn on news anywhere in the world, including sometimes in Israel, and you still hear talking about those problematic settlements or the occupied territories and stuff like that. So your average Jew living in Judea and Samaria may feel that the Christians are with them, but they may not appreciate what that means. I don't mean from a spiritual point of view. I mean from a political point of view. Okay, they're with us. So what? What can they do for us? We're still being boycotted, and we're still having all these issues in the media and all that kind of stuff. So what? Not that they say so what. I mean, we bring Christians to visit people in communities all the time, and they are overwhelmed with the love and the warmth and encouragement of the Christian individuals that they meet. But it's kind of like, you meet somebody and you really like them. Okay, you like them. Are you going to say because you like them, they're going to change the world? You like them. They're nice people. They're good for us. They like us. We like them. Everything is good. the dedication of that embassy, all of a sudden everybody opened their eyes and said, my gosh, it's not just some nice Christians that we meet who happen to come and visit. We have a cup of coffee and we say amen together and everybody goes on, you know, or as is the case in this community right here, you know, we could say, oh, that wonderful park in Kedumim, isn't that great? Okay, it's great. Now let's be frank. The park in Kedumim is great. Is it going to change the world? I doubt it. It's making a lot of people very happy. Is it changing the world? Just on its own, that little park? Not sure. Don't think so. But the cumulative effect of the parks and of the visits and of the vocal expressions of support, and suddenly people in Israel said, now we understand why this president moved the embassy, because he had these pastors whispering in his ear. And I was able to experience that firsthand, because the morning of the dedication, I wasn't one of the fancy, you know, important people that was invited to the dedication. But I was invited to a reception that morning where the people of Judea and Samaria, some of the representative leaders, mayors and leaders and people like me, you know, big mouths and stuff, you know, were invited to welcome some of these Christian leaders, including John Hagee, who came for the dedication event. And one of the people that was part of that delegation, a pastor and his wife, who I've known for many, many years from the United States, she told me, she goes, I want you to know, Sondra, that she was telling me she had been invited to a meeting with Trump before the election. One of those, you know, fundraiser slash, what do you know, support kind of sessions. And I guess it was a pretty high-powered, intimate kind of affair. And she was saying that, you know, and they listened to him and whatever. And she then said she went up to him, to Trump, before he became president. But it was one of the last events before he became president, before the election. And she went up to him and she said, you have to move the embassy to Jerusalem. Okay? And here she was coming back to Israel to take part in this amazing event, and she felt so excited. Now, I'm sure she wasn't the only pastor or pastor's wife that had said that to Trump, okay? But what we were able to see then is there's no question in anybody's mind today that if it weren't for the Christians who love Israel in America, this would never have happened. And what you're seeing, this clip, is really the culmination of this growing realization all over Israel, but particularly in Judea and Samaria. Not just that we have Christians who love us, and isn't that nice, but we have Christians who love us who are changing the world. Who are changing the world. And the question is, can we keep doing this? And we have to, okay? And I think everybody here in this room, you're a wonderful group of people, and you have probably among the pioneers of churches who love Israel. And I think that you need to understand, number one, that you are changing the world. Because your park in Kedumim and the support you give to us and to so many others and your visits to Israel are part of a huge and growing movement. And we've got to keep those numbers going. We've got to keep you raising your voices. And so we came today with this clip. We're putting it out, and I really want you to help us send this everywhere. I want every Christian who loves Israel in America and actually around the world to know how much we appreciate them and you, okay? And this is a relationship that in and of itself is miraculous. Who would have thought that we would be in this kind of situation? Who would have thought? I mean, you know, we talk about Holocaust Remembrance Day. You know, how many years ago was the Holocaust? 75, 73? I mean, you know, not a lot of years ago. And in those years, most Christians in Europe were murdering Jews or handing them over to the Nazis so the Nazis would murder Jews. I don't know if you know that after the Holocaust, after the war was over, Jews went back to Poland, to their homes to see what was left, and were there any family left, any neighbors left? And Jews were attacked after the Holocaust by Polish Christians. They may have been bad Christians, but it doesn't matter. They called themselves Christians, okay? And they were. That is the reality that most Jews knew until recently. And so, yes, you are changing the world. And you're not just changing the world because the American embassy is now in Jerusalem, but I think the change is so much more significant, so much more comprehensive, because it is a spiritual change. You cannot take somebody who decades earlier were going around just finding a Jew to murder, and today doing anything they can to help Israel and the Jewish people. That kind of transformation. And sometimes, you know what? A German friend of mine sent me an amazing clip on Holocaust Remembrance Day 2 weeks ago. Young German Christians, each one of whom was the grandchild of a Nazi. Each one of those young people and it was in German, but it had Hebrew subtitles, so we knew what it was about. Each one of them was talking about how my grandfather was a Nazi, my grandfather murdered Jews, persecuted, and each one had a specific detail that they had learned about their grandparents. And they say, but we love Israel, and we love the Jewish people, and we stand with Israel. And then at the end, they all sing Hatikva. I mean, talk about miraculous transformation. That's not just, the Christian world. That's these people recognizing the evil of their grandparents and expressing a completely different sentiment. And we are the generation that are part of that are witnessing that. And again, I feel like I've been doing this for a long time, and I started out just meeting some individuals here in this church, and others here and there and here and there and here and there, but to know that we really have been part of something so enormous is amazing. It really is. We're now standing before, everybody's waiting for Trump's plan of the century, right? And, there's been a lot of hush-hush, and nobody really knows exactly what it's about. There have been a few telling statements. Oh, by the way, in that film it says, we get this as your free gift. Well, I gave them out to all of you, so you already have them. But whatever. Anyway, no, but I want to go back to this plan of the century. And I can't talk to you about the plan because nobody knows what's really in it. And there are people who are afraid of it because there have been statements that have come out of the administration to the tune of everyone's going to have to make some painful concessions. One thing that I think is very interesting is that the Palestinians have completely boycotted the Americans. They won't talk to them, which I think is very interesting. Yeah, darn is right. Okay, but now I might be naive. Excuse me. I might be naive. I am an absolute optimist. What can I tell you? That's just how I am. But I want to tell you about some of the few things that I'm seeing that give me reason for optimism as we wait for this plan, okay? First of all, I think it was Jared Kushner that said recently, talking about the plan, he's saying, well, we have to get rid of this two-state solution thing because we've been pushing that for so long, and we have to recognize that it's a failed equation, a failed concept. Well, that's good, okay? Now, people have been talking about autonomy, that this plan may call for autonomy for the Palestinians. Now, just to give a sense of context, that's more or less what they have today. Okay, the Oslo process, for all its problems, and it certainly had a great deal of problems, initially and I gave you all these maps, but I think this is a good time to just review the A, B, and C of it all. And it's going to be very important to remember these issues as we look into what the plan is going to be about as it is released. This map shows you the original Oslo. That was the process that began in 1993. There were 3 separate agreements under the Oslo process. The first was in 1993 that gave Gaza and the city of Gaza and the city of Jericho to the Palestinian Authority, created the Palestinian Authority. The second was in 1995. That was the most comprehensive of the stages. And that created 3 different types of territory in Judea and Samaria that are represented here by different colors. We have a solid brown, a solid yellow, and then the background pale yellow, beige, whatever color, okay? The background is Area C, and that's the part of Judea and Samaria that remains in exclusive Israeli control to this day. All Jewish communities are in Area C, as are all the roads leading to Jewish communities, okay? So basically, when I go in and out of communities, wherever I am, all over Judea and Samaria, I am never in Area B or C, only in Area, never in Area A or B, only in Area C. Area A is the solid brown, and these are the areas that were handed over to the exclusive control of the Palestinian Authority. That meant initially that the Israeli army completely withdrew from those areas and did not have authority to go into those areas, even if they knew that there was a terrorism cell, that there was a munitions plant, that there was activities going on that endangered Israel. They still had no right to go into Area A, the brown, to do something about it. Area B is the solid yellow. That was an area that was given to the joint control of the Palestinian Authority and Israel, where the Palestinian Authority had exclusive civilian control, but Israel retained security control. Now, when that began, and the third agreement, by the way, was in 1999, that was White Plantation. That was when they gave most of Hebron to the Palestinian Authority. Before that, Hebron remained in Israeli hands. Today, 20% of Hebron is still Area C in Israeli hands. The places where Jews live, the old city of Hebron, is all in Israeli hands. The problem, the 80% that was handed to the Palestinian Authority, that was a tremendous security threat to the Jews living in the 20% of Hebron. Have you all been to Hebron? Most of you? Okay. And you've been at the place in the old city of Hebron. Have you been at that place where that little baby girl, Shalhevet Pas, was murdered? Okay. And there's this place, there's on the wall, they have a little memorial there, a baby carriage with a flame coming out of it. When you're standing at that place and you look across, not into the Jewish neighborhood, but out, across, up on the hill is a hill that's all Palestinian homes. That hill is called Abu Snena. And that is a hill that under these accords were given in the complete control of the Palestinians. And from the very beginning, once that transfer was made, the Jews living in Hebron were saying, that endangers us. Because they're up on that hill, they're looking down at us. We know they have ammunition, we know they have guns, etc. And the Israeli government at that point said, there's nothing we can do. We signed agreement, we had to give it up. It is out of our hands. We have given them control. Now, of course, this murder of Shalhevet Pas was just one of a number of examples, but it really highlights how dangerous this situation was, because from that very hilltop, a Palestinian had a sniper rifle aimed at this little baby in the baby carriage and murdered her. Where you had her parents were right there, or her father, somebody was right there. The other children in the family, many other children were playing in the playground right there. I mean, it's a miracle that more children were not murdered. They were all there. After that, and as a result of a number of other terrorist activities, the Israeli army said, no more. And they went into all these areas, the yellow and the brown. Even though under the original Oslo Accords, they were supposed to stay out of those areas, even for security reasons, that all broke down. And beginning in 2002, something like that, the Israeli army went in. It was an operation that took a few months, and basically went in, cleared out the worst of the terrorist infrastructure in Area A and B, and have been going in and out of these areas ever since, okay? So effectively, what we have today is an autonomy situation. In both Area A and B, the Palestinian Authority runs the civilian lives of the Arabs living there. However, the Israeli army sees itself as ultimately responsible for the entire area from a security point of view and go in and out of the area at will. They don't sit there policing the area. They're not giving traffic tickets. They're not worrying about, ambulances or any other issues, but they have intelligence assets in there, and when they know about something going on, they go in. In fact, the Israeli army is going into these towns and villages almost every night, doing something. And you know what? In many instances, they're actually stopping, arresting, whatever, terrorists who are not only a threat to Israel, but are a threat to the Palestinian Authority. They're very often members of Hamas or Islamic Jihad or any of these other groups that are more radical and actually very much against the Palestinian Authority. So in most cases, the Palestinian Authority cooperates with Israel as Israel comes in. In fact, it is in their interest for Israel to come in because Israel very often saves their own necks, because these guys are not only trying to kill Israelis, they're trying to kill Abbas. Okay? That's the situation as we have it now. So when they talk about an autonomy, the question is, will it be that different from what we have today? I cannot imagine a situation where Israel will once again give up security control of the entire area. It's kind of like been there, done that. Exactly. And Gaza is a perfect example of what happens when Israel totally withdraws. We're not there at all. We're not there civilian, we're not there military. Judea and Samaria, as you can see from the map, it's an intertwined area where Jews are living in and around these areas. Okay? So that's also something to keep in mind. When people talk about an autonomy, is it going to be that different from the situation we have today? Okay? Another thing that you hear people talking about is annexation. Some people believe that the Trump plan, ironically, may open the door for annexation. And it's no coincidence that Netanyahu, for the first time ever, before these past elections, declared that he was going to annex Area C. Now, this plan of annexing Area C was actually Naftali Bennett's plan. Now, those of you who heard my little conversation when we were up, who was with me and could do me when I came and gave an analysis of the elections, okay? So I talked about the different parties, and we talked about Naftali Bennett, and I have to say I am absolutely so disappointed that he did not make it into the Knesset, okay? So there are people who say, now Netanyahu is a master of whatever he says at the last 24 hours before an election of getting people who ordinarily would have voted for someone else to vote for him. And I'm telling you, nobody like him. He's brilliant at this. Now, so there are people who say, well, he was just saying, I'm going to annex Area C because he wanted to compete with Bennett. He wanted to out Bennett so that people would then vote for him instead of Bennett. But, pardon? He said it, okay. He said it. And look, I'm not naive. I don't believe tomorrow he's already going to start putting through legislation to annex Area C. But it's no question in my mind, he knows already what's in Trump's plan, or he certainly knows a good deal about it. He would not have said that if he would have felt that it would have seriously jeopardized the relationship of Israel and the United States, especially today when we have probably the most pro-Israel president that there has ever been in the United States. Okay, so that already tells me that something's going on there that may make this beginning annexation process easier rather than more difficult. So that's also something to look at when we see this plan being unveiled. Now, I had a fascinating experience a couple weeks ago. I have a young man who is not so young, whatever, younger than me, but who has started working for me recently. His name is Yisrael. I hope that you'll have the opportunity to meet him, a very dynamic fellow. And he lives in one of the communities in Judea. He lives in Beit Haggai. And I've known him for many, many years. Our paths have crossed all over. He's an expert in security. He actually has his own security firm. But he's also done all kinds of things advocating for Judea and Samaria in various ways. He speaks a fluent English, and that's how our paths have crossed. And he actually came to me some months ago and says, you know, you're doing amazing work. I want to join your team. And it's hard for me to say no when somebody as talented as he is calls me up. And so he's part of our team now. Anyway, one of the things that he has been doing for years now is developing relationships with Palestinian Arabs who live in Judea and Samaria. He finds out about different people. He sits and has conversation with them. He is fluent in Arabic, so he can speak to them in Arabic. He understands what's going on. He's a character, okay? He calls me up. We had a meeting together in Kiryat Arba. There's a new mayor now in Kiryat Arba, and we had a meeting with him. And he says, Sondra, can you give me an extra hour while you're in Kiryat Arba? I said, yeah, sure, I can do it that day. He says, I've got to take you to a friend of mine. Okay. Takes me to a Palestinian in his home, in his village. I think, this is interesting. Go into this home. First of all, a stunning home. A stunning home. Big, huge. I mean, I didn't see the whole home. I just saw the living room. The living room was probably the size of this room. I mean, huge. And couches here and couches there. Unbelievable. A very, very refined gentleman, you know, and clearly wealthy. An engineer, has his own business interests, you know. Anyway, so we get to talking. He's fluent in English, Hebrew, and Arabic. I don't know Arabic, so we were speaking in English for the most part, but also a bit of Hebrew. Anyway, so Yisrael wanted me to meet him. He said this is a man he's been very close to for many years. And they have these heart-to-heart discussions, and so we're sitting and talking. And after the niceties and the politeness, and, you know, you have your drink, and, you know, delicious, and then, so he starts to tell me, he says, if I were Israeli, and this was after the elections, okay? If I were Israeli, I would vote for Netanyahu. All off your chair. I would vote for Netanyahu. I said, why? He says, because he promised to annex us. Well, it turns out this guy, his village is Area B, but for some reason, I don't know why, his house is at the edge and actually in Area C. Maybe he was very close to the road, whatever, his house. He says, all my friends and neighbors want Israel to annex Judea and Samaria, and they've all called me up and says, if Bibi keeps his promise, we're moving into your house so that we also can be in Area C. Did you expect to hear that? Then he told me that he met Jason Greenblatt. He met David Friedman. Okay? That day, and he said this to me, he says, and today there's a new political party that is being announced within the Palestinian Authority. And indeed, the next day or 2 days later, it was in the news. His name, this guy's name, I'm not going to share you his name because he's always in the background. You will never hear his name. He's very connected. He does go in and out of Abbas's office. He meets with all the people. He's still alive. He says many of his friends have been killed. He says, but he's still alive. He thinks the reason he's still alive is because he's not corruptible. They can't pay him off. And That must also be because he's wealthy. I don't know, whatever. I can't evaluate how they work there in that Palestinian society. He was talking about how corrupt the Palestinian Authority is and how people want to get rid of them and how they look. And this is what he said. He says, look, your country, just more than 70 years old, it is amazing what you have done. And you have freedom. No Arab society in the Middle East has freedom. We want freedom too. I mean, I was like, oh my gosh. It was just unbelievable. This is an Arab who's, okay, anyway, what's this political party that he was talking about? So there's a fellow named El-Jabari who is, that's a very prominent, powerful family in Hebron. Palestinian, and they, I guess, and I knew about this already. Have any of you ever met Noam Arnon in Hebron? He is one of the leaders of the Jewish community in Hebron. Very, very interesting fellow. And, you know, next time you go, let me know and I'll connect you with him. Also, he's written a book on Machpelah Cave. He's like really. He went down. He was the one who was one of the ones who went all the way down to that cave. He tells that story. Anyway, so he has this relationship already with the El-Jabaris for quite some time, living in Hebron. Anyway, we knew already from him that they were pro-Israel, and if it was up to the El-Jabaris in Israel, we would all be friends and there wouldn't be any problems. But it is a force to be reckoned with, this El-Jabari clan in Hebron, and they, I guess, are not big fans of the Palestinian Authority. So this El-Jabari, the head of the clan or whatever, together with some other people whose names I don't remember, set up a new political party, which is a direct threat to Abbas and the Palestinian Authority, and they're calling on annexation. A political party in the Palestinian Authority, whatever society, that is calling for annexation, and they have been talking to the Trump people. And one of the things that they're saying is they're very upset that the Palestinians are boycotting the Americans, okay? And so they're talking to the Americans. And they're saying, this is what Palestinians really want. Listen to us. Okay, now, there are problems with this too. I don't want to paint, you know, because I'm not sure we want to annex, you know, all of Judea and Samaria and suddenly have 2.5 million Palestinians be citizens of Israel. I'm not sure that's a good thing, okay? It's very interesting, the situation in East Jerusalem. The Arabs who live in East Jerusalem are all permanent residents of Israel. They have all the rights and privileges of Israeli citizens, except one. They cannot vote in the Knesset. They can vote for the city of Jerusalem leadership, and they have all the welfare payments and rights and education and everything, okay? That's the only thing they can't do is vote for the Knesset. Now, they have the right to apply for citizenship, and it's difficult for them to get citizenship because if they have connections with terrorist groups or whatever, they're not going to get it. But very few apply. Some have applied and some have received it. Very few have even applied. So one of the things that people are saying, well, even if we annex and we give them all permanent residency, how likely is it that they're going to apply for citizenship? Well, that's a debate, okay? Now, I had a very interesting encounter with another fellow about a year ago. There was a tour group, an American Christian tour group that was in Israel that I've been connected with a pastor. I've spoken in that church. Unfortunately, or fortunately, whatever, they used an East Jerusalem tour company, which means it's an Arab tour company, to handle all their arrangements. So their bus driver was Arab and their tour guide was Arab. But both of them were Christian, or they said they were Christian, okay? It was very interesting, though. I always have I've had experience with groups like this. I've had people tell me they know Christians who've come to Israel, Zionists, and left anti-Israel because of tour guides like this, you know, Palestinian tour guides who say they're Christian and then spend the whole time spewing hatred against Israel and convincing the groups who don't know any better. So I was expecting that sort of thing. But I was speaking to the group. I didn't care about the tour guide. And we had the group in Tekoa. And we showed them around. And we brought them into the place. So first of all, the whole time, the bus driver, who's an Arab from Bethlehem, okay? And he's saying, wow, this is amazing, this is amazing. I'm looking, I'm saying, what do you, oh, this is beautiful. I think all groups should come here. This guy's saying this, okay? The tour guide is from Nazareth, so he's an Israeli citizen, all right? But he identified himself as a Palestinian. He says, we're all Palestinians. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're an Israeli citizen, you're from the Galilee, or you're from Judea and Samaria, where they're not Israeli citizens, we're all Palestinian. But he's Christian, okay? So that's how they identified themselves. We had the group together in a room. The bus driver was out at the bus, but the tour guide was there, and we give our talk. Me and someone from Tekoa, we give our talk, and it's time for questions and answers. And usually the tour guide is supposed to shut up. It's like none of his business, right? He's just supposed to be a quiet observer. And he raises his hand first, and he asks a question. He says, why didn't you annex it all in 1967? I looked at my colleague, Aviva. We looked at each other. We almost fell. We just said, we agree. We should have annexed it. Okay? Now, we then had a discussion because I said, yeah, I'd love to annex it, but it's going to be a Jewish state. That's where we had a bit of a disagreement. Well, you know, what does it have to be a Jewish state? It can be a state for everybody, for Jews, for Arabs, Muslims, Christians, what does it matter? And I said, well, there's a difference between it being a state where all these people have freedom and a state that's not going to be a Christian state, it's not going to be a Muslim state, it's going to be a Jewish state, okay? So that remains an issue, I can tell you. And even with some of these people, this guy that I met in his home in south of Hebron, this fellow, he was perfectly fine with it being a Jewish state. Okay, he was fine. He said, yeah, Jewish state, that's okay. You know what else he said? He said, it was kind of funny when he said this. He said, don't worry about the numbers. I mean, I don't agree with him, but I thought it was very telling what he said. He said, don't worry about the numbers. Even if we have 120 members of Knesset, he said, even if 119 out of 120 of the members of Knesset would be Arabs, the prime minister would definitely be a Jew. He's the only one who can run a country. Only a Jew can run the country. This is what he said. I thought it was pretty funny. But anyway, what is my point here? First of all, these are some of the people that the Trump administration is talking to. And I think it is the first time that an American administration has been willing to talk to these people. We have been saying all along, if there's going to be peace, it's going to have to come at the ground up. It's going to have to be between Palestinians who are interested and willing to live with us in peace, that we're going to get together. If they're going to keep wanting to kill us, there's no peace. Do I think this problem is going to be solved tomorrow? No. Do I think Trump's plan will succeed? I don't know what it is, but I can't imagine it's going to succeed where everybody else failed. But it may include new things that no one else has put forward before. And I hope, and I pray, that Netanyahu will have the courage to do some bold things. First of all, he's got to be willing to put forward legislation that enables the Knesset to make decisions, not the Supreme Court of Israel. The Supreme Court is important, and we want to have a strong Supreme Court, but sometimes they overstep their boundaries. They overstep boundaries that here in the United States would never be legitimate. That's number one. And number two, we want to make sure that Netanyahu has the strength and the courage to do what he said he was going to do, begin the annexation process. But I want to go back now to where I began, the importance of the Christian voice, particularly here in America, okay? There are evangelical leaders, Christian leaders, who continue to talk to Trump, whispering in his ear, pressuring him that he dare not put elements into this plan of the century that would harm Israel and that would jeopardize Israel's claim to all of the land of Israel, okay? We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what this plan is going to be. In a few weeks, it's going to be announced, and we have no idea what elements those plans will take. But now is the time to continue raising your voices and pressuring. And in the same way that I believe every single one of you in this church for sure, directly or indirectly, helped bring us to the transfer of the embassy to Jerusalem, I believe everybody in this room can continue making that difference, okay? And there's a few really, really practical ways to do that. Wait, I was going to put around a sign-up sheet, but I didn't. Here's my sign-up sheet. Any of you not on our mailing list, I'm passing this around. You need to get on this list because we need to be able to communicate with you. If you want to put your name, even if you're on the list just so that I know you were here, that's great, but pass this around. That would be a big help because we need you as our army, okay? So we put out this clip today. We need you, if you're already on our list, you got it in your email. We need you to forward this to everyone you know. This is the kind of thing, if it goes viral, people will pay attention. It will get into the media, okay? This traditional media. And this is very, very important because it's just one more example of the relationship between us. It is no coincidence. This is not just the people of Israel. This is the people of Judea and Samaria that are saying thank you to Christians. And that is a very subtle way coming from us for the message to get out there how Christians are important to us. And by sending this viral, share, it's on our Facebook page, by sharing it on Facebook, by sending it, transferring it to email, all this stuff, okay? Put your name down. If you haven't yet gotten it, send me an email. My email address is on the back. I'll send it to you. You can look it up in YouTube, and you've got to see it and then share it or forward it or whatever. Okay, that's very, very important. We also need you to get involved. First of all, I have another thing here. Now, I know that a lot of you, or some of you, were just in Israel now in Kedumim in March, and some of you are planning to go back again next year. Those of you who might be interested in a tour, or if you know people, okay, this is a tour that we're doing in September, a 2-week tour. Okay, an in-depth tour that includes a lot of time in Judea and Samaria as well as time in the rest of Israel. It's being led by our Australian representative. A lot of Australians have already signed up, but we also have Americans signing up. And I have these brochures here. I urge you to pick them up and take them, pass them around. We need more people to come and visit in Judea and Samaria. This is part of the message that goes out. So I'll just put these here and people can pick them up. Some of you have been amazing supporters of our work, and I want to thank you for that. Those of you who don't know about it, and here, of course, at the church, as a church, we've always had wonderful support. I have this. Wait, sorry. This is our most recent folder that has all the various projects we're working on. Those of you who are interested in supporting a particular project, take a look at this. Again, it's not just that you're helping what we're doing, which is very important, but it's the message that goes out. It's the message that goes out that says Christians are connected with Judea and Samaria and making a difference. So those are some very practical ways that I would like to encourage you to get involved. But before I close, I would like to share a short message from some of the recent Torah portions that we read, okay? We're in Leviticus now. You study the Torah portion. Right. So we're in Leviticus now, and Leviticus can be kind of dull sometimes. But there's some powerful messages in Leviticus, right? You read these laws, and you go, oh, give me a headache, right? But, so I want to focus on in both in chapter 18 and in chapter 20. Basically, these are all connected chapters. It's what was read this week and the week before. And we have here, there's a lot of issues here having to do with sexual morality. A lot of things having to do with the word that is very often used is purity and impurity, or defiling, with behavior being such that it is defiling the land. And I want to just read a few key verses. So first of all, in Leviticus 18, we have the following. This is like an introduction to this whole section. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, I am the Lord your God. After the actions of the land of Egypt, in which you dwelt, you shall not do, or shall not follow. And the doings or the actions in the land of Canaan, into which I bring you, you shall not do. Neither shall you walk in their practices. You shall do my judgments and keep my ordinances to walk in them. I am the Lord your God." Okay? This is very interesting because as an introduction to these do's and don'ts, mostly in the field of sexual morality, God is saying very simply, the land you just left, all those Egyptians, don't do what they do. The land you're coming into, all those Canaanites, don't do what they do. That's a very interesting thing. I mean, basically, you're saying you're bookended in a way. Egypt here, Canaan here, Israel's in the middle. Now, Israel right now has been in the desert. They haven't been dealing with any of these countries. They're on their own. And now God is saying, I'm going to bring you into the country full of Canaanites that you're going to have to get rid of, full of Canaanites that have done things that you have to ensure don't influence you, because you cannot take on their practices. Essentially, what God is saying is create a desert in the land of Canaan. Take that bubble that you've been living in until now and take it with you when you go into the land of Israel, because you dare not be influenced not by the Egyptian customs and not by the Canaanite customs. Okay, and then we have a whole list of do's and don'ts. And then we go to the, wait, there was something else here that I wanted to read from, but I don't remember if later on in that chapter, it says in verse 24, defile not yourselves in any of these things, for in all these the nations were defiled, which I cast out before you. And the land was defiled. Therefore I do punish its iniquity upon it, and the land vomits out her inhabitants. Here God is basically explaining what happened to the Canaanites. Why are the Jews of Israel, or the children of the Israelites, why are they going to be able to get rid of the Canaanites? Because he's saying basically the land itself is vomiting them out because of all the iniquity that they brought into the land. And then at the end of this whole list, in the end of chapter 20, we have as follows. And you shall not walk in the practices of the nation which I cast out before you. Again, for they committed all these things, and therefore I abhorred them. But I have said to you, you shall inherit their land. I will give it to you to possess it, a land that flows with milk and honey. I am the Lord your God, who have separated you from the peoples. You shall therefore distinguish between clean beasts and unclean, between unclean birds and clean, and you shall not make your souls abominable by beast or by bird or by any manner of living thing that creeps on the ground, which I have separated from you as unclean. And you shall be holy to me, for I the Lord am holy, and have separated you from the peoples, that you should be mine. So here we have a continuation of the same idea, where God says, again, that the Canaanites are going to be vomited out of the land because of how they defiled the land, how they behaved. But then we have another idea entered here. And we talked about the bubble. God defines the bubble as separation. Okay? He says, you have to separate yourselves from this evil. And then God explains, we had a whole list of commandments, not just sexual morality, but we had in these other chapters nearby, we also had a list of do's and don'ts having to do with what animals you eat and what animals you don't eat. And frankly, if I look at Jewish law sets upon us as Jews all kinds of rules and regulations that make us different, that sets our way of life very differently. And here, really, God is explaining what's that all about. I need you to be different. I need you to set yourselves out as different so that you don't be influenced by the Egyptians or the Canaanites. And it's all connected with the land. If you are not separating yourselves out, you will end up stepping into all this iniquity, and the land will then vomit you out as well. When I think about this picture here, we're talking about separation, the people of Israel needing to separate themselves from other nations and how other nations do it, and how that is connected to staying in the land, deserving to stay in the land. I have a few thoughts that I wanted to share with you on that. First of all, I had an interesting conversation. A few weeks ago, I was in the States for a very short trip, and I was meeting in someone's home, a group of Christians who were supportive of Israel. I had never met them before. I don't think they were necessarily evangelical in the usual sense. They were pro-Israel, but they weren't part of the usual kind of people that I usually meet. And we had a conversation, and the issue of anti-Semitism came up. And one of the people there suggested that the reason for anti-Semitism, the reason why some of these things have happened, was because the Jews were separate, were different. And so there was a resentment against Jews for living in Europe, let's say, but being different, dressing different, praying differently, you know, having different rules and regulations. And I disputed that. I said, yes, that probably was a situation when some of the anti-Semitic attacks against Jews in Eastern Europe. I said, but what about the Holocaust? I said, Nazi Germany turned against the Jews at a time when the Jews had assimilated. You would walk down the street of Berlin and you couldn't tell a Jew from a non-Jew. They dressed alike. They spoke the same language. Most of the Jews in Germany in that time had completely thrown off belief, practice as a Jew, didn't go to synagogue, you know. I said, and look, the worst anti-Semitism of all came out of that. And he had never thought of that. I thought that was very telling, but it was disturbing to me that there was an element there of, as if to say, I don't think he meant to say this, but there was an element that says, when Jews separate themselves, then they get into trouble. I think what the Bible is saying, the Jews need to separate themselves. Now, Isaiah calls upon the Jews to be a light unto the nations. Okay? Now, how do I put this all together? And putting it together with what we were talking about just now. We talked about the most miraculous change in Christianity, in the attitude of Christianity towards Jews that we are witnessing, that you are part of. And one of the things I think that's so amazing, if I come to a church like this, okay, when I grew up in the United States in a very comfortable environment. I did not ever experience anti-Semitism, but I can tell you that the assumption of the Jewish community was that if you leave the comfort of your synagogue or your Jewish community and you go into the general community, don't look different. Take your kippah, put it in your pocket, okay? Don't wear a scarf, put on a wig. Look as much as possible like everybody else, okay? That's how I was raised. I rebelled against it pretty young. I thought, this doesn't make any sense to me. I'm a Jew, I'm proud to be a Jew, I don't care if I look different. But one of the things that's so interesting was I come to Israel, and what I discovered is people like you come to Israel, you want to meet people like me. My headscarf doesn't deter you. If anything, it attracts you. Not because you're going to all walk around putting on headscarves. Because I think, and if I allow me to express how I see it, you're seeing me as someone who is standing separate, as God wants us to be, following the commandments. Now, I've been interviewed very often about the settlement movement. Why is it that Christians like the settlement movement? There's a lot of issues, biblical, etc. But one of the things that I really and truly believe is that it's because the settlement movement has been so controversial. And it is the one movement in Israel that is based 100% on biblical and religious principles. If you will, it is a place where Jews are up there in their headscarves and in their kippot and with the tzitzit flying and saying, this is who we are and this is why we're in the land of Israel. And you know what? That's when the nations of the world look at us and pay attention. Some hate us. But that's also why people like you are able to see us. If we looked like everybody else, if we talked like everybody else, you wouldn't hear us. Because we would be mixing in with the general chatter that you hear, right? And I think when Isaiah talked about being a light unto the nations, he was talking about this. We can only be a light unto the nations if we are true to God. And I don't believe in going around saying, everybody look at me, and we're not the type of people that says, oh, everybody got to be like me. We don't believe that, okay? Everybody has their faith and everybody has their customs, and I think that's fine. That's great. But I think God did set us aside to give us all these laws that we need to practice so that we would be distinguished, not just so that we wouldn't be influenced by everybody around us, but so that you could see us. Not to see us to become like us. No! So that you could see us, and by seeing us, see what God is doing in the land of Israel. Because what does God say here in Leviticus? When we are separate, he's giving us a land of flowing of milk and honey. When we are what we are, and saying who we are and why we are, you connect to us, and then you can also see the blessings that the land is giving to us, and you too can partake of those blessings. We're living in really crazy times. But I do believe that this newfound partnership between Christians and Jews, and I have to say, people look at you and think you're weird too. Did you know that? I don't think we're weird. I don't think you're weird. I don't think I'm weird. But you know what? It's the people that are going to stand up and are going to be willing to separate themselves from the iniquities and the abominations that surround us. Not by looking down at some people or yelling at people, or just by being who you are. True to your principles and to trying to be godly and follow what God wants us to do. You're doing what you're doing. And staying here in America and whispering in Trump's ear, move that embassy, support Israel and Judea and Samaria. We're being what we are in the land so that you can see us. That's the partnership. And I want to thank you, all of you, for taking part in that for so many years. And don't forget, share our film everywhere. Thank you. Yeah.
And Gary Cooper brought over Elikam Haetzny.
Oh, yeah.
And I knew him from other meetings.
Right.
And he talked about when they, in '67, the Arab mayor of Bethlehem, at that time was 85%
Christian, right?
15% Muslim. Now it's the opposite, if there is 15%. They came to the Israelis, he was one of them, to say, annex us.
Right.
We want to be part of you. They didn't want to be with the Palestinian Authority. They didn't do it, obviously. And now it's come up again, and maybe with
But it's interesting.
And Trump buffering them up, something good will happen.
And it's interesting you mentioned Eliakim Ha'etzli, because this Palestinian that I visited a few weeks ago, he said he had a lot to do with Eliakim Ha'etzli. They were good friends, and he was actually used his legal advice. And he said most of the Arabs had as well.
Is he still alive?
He is still alive, but I don't think he's active. His wife died recently, but he's still around.
This is a guy that was fairly secular, a big lawyer with limousines in Tel Aviv.
Right.
But he was preaching about the settlement, so he
moved to Kiryat Arba. Right. He's amazing. He's amazing.
Anything else, Joe? Anything else?
No, I was just encouraged by that.
Yes. I want to tell you, Sondra, your message was good. Really good. It's always good, but you're definitely seeing something that's real, that we've been preaching and talking about for a very long time. It's really uplifting to see that you're seeing it. And if you're seeing it, there are other Israelis that's seeing it. I'm not someone to ever correct an Israeli, but you have Christians about 2.5 billion, and they're not us.
Right.
And it's not that we're separatists or we're elite Christians. We're definitely not. But we don't identify with about 99.99% of Christianity.
Right.
And so we're biblical, and much of Christianity just isn't. And that's just a fact. So wonderful message, and you're tapped into something that's real. And we've been saying it for a long time. This is a global movement. To say it's grassroots doesn't suffice. It's organic. It's of the Spirit of God, and it's happening everywhere. And praise God for that.